Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I've got to run downstairs at 10:30 to rehearse with the choir, and Yuri's covering from now until then. So we'll start off with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants who seek through art and music to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth. And grant to us now even glimpses of your beauty, making us worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So today we are going to be talking about John Rutter. And here is John. I think I can take my mask off on my way up here.
That'd be better.
John is an Englishman, as we discussed earlier, and is one of the most prolific church music composers in the late 20th and early 21st century. John studied music at Clare College in Cambridge and began in the 70s serving as director of music at the college chapel at Clare. And it's at that time that he started his own arrangements of Christmas carols and Advent carols, which quickly moved into anthems for the church year. John is well loved in America and certainly in England and has many accolades, which I'm not going to read to you now. But practically for mainline churches like Westminster, his compositions just work. It's a good, healthy mix of English and other languages, primarily Latin. The accompaniments are either none, a cappella, organ, or piano, and his large-scale works like the Magnificat we're going to talk about today, he specifically orchestrated for a reduced orchestra. And I'll be showing you, my conductor score a little bit later up on the screen. But church choirs like Westminster's are few and far between. We have about 60 voices when everyone's here. Most church choirs are more in the 20s and 30s. And Rutter, not being a dummy, he makes his money doing this. So he's taken the full orchestras and pared it down to a chamber orchestra. And we'll even be using that mainly because of space. We can't fit quite that many people up on the chamber. The Magnificat is the Song of Mary, and I'm just going to throw up the words here. And apologies for jumping back and forth between pages. My laptop died last week, so I'm doing this last minute on an iPad, and it's just not quite the same. Anyway, for anyone who's been to Evensong, you have these words etched into your brain. My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior. And in this particular setting of the Magnificat, Rutter not only uses these words or the root of those words, which of course would have been in Latin, he also takes poetry from the 15th and the 16th century in England it sort of functions as a commentary on the sections of text that he's replacing in those places. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. The Magnificat is always sung at Vespers, so that's the divine office that happens at 6 o'clock in the evening in monastic communities. And during the English Reformation, they combined Vespers and Compline into a service that I love, which is called Evensong. And the Mag is always sung at the Evensong services as well. Well, since we're talking about ancient history here, I thought we would listen to the first bit of the plain song Magnificat. Content is not supported. Wow. There's more than one way to skin a cat.
There you go.
We can share content. I have to do this. Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's see if this, oh, there I am again. All right, so share content, screen, start broadcast. All right, cross your fingers. That looks like it. Terrific. All right, our trusty friend YouTube. Again, if ads pop up on this, I'm sorry. There's no way to get rid of them. refresh us with the translation of that, because I'm sure we don't have all Latin scholars in the room. Even with the music grayed out, you'll notice some differences in what we see in our hymnal or what we see in modern music of any kind. Chiefly, there's 4 lines instead of 5. And the note heads are squares instead of rounds. These are called neumes, N-E-U-M-E-S. And the reason is before the Protestant Reformation or even the rise of the middle class, church music was limited to singing only. They were instrumental musicians. In fact, they were forbidden by most of the popes. So there's only 4 lines because singers only need about that much space to cover the range of notes that a singer can sing. They're square because a quill was used to write on the vellum or on the parchment. So you dip it in your inkwell and drag it to the right, which of course makes a little square note. And then where they're connected and whatnot, there's all kinds of rules about, which ones come first and that, and the other. But what I hope you noticed is, one, it was a choir of men's voices, all singing in unison, and the formula is the same. So the notes, this is verse 6, as you can see there, the notes in the top line were exactly the same in verses 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And the verses in the bottom line, or the notes in the bottom line, were exactly the same as well. So it's a formula that was used to take this ancient text and make it singable by many. Of course, we're not wed only to ancient forms of music. We also have modern forms of music. This is the setting of the Magnificat by another English, actually Canadian composer, Sarah McDonald. One of my professional goals, well, pre-pandemic and now that we're sort of back to normal, is to be very intentional with including music written by non-white men in our repertoire at Westminster, because there's a lot of it. And of course, I grew up with that, Mendelssohn, Bach, Beethoven, all the big names, right? But they have something in common, and they're all white men and dead. So are important, and it's really important, I think, for the church to be showing off excellent female composers and also persons of colors from around the world. So this is Sarah McDonald's setting. It will sound familiar, especially to our chorister here, because we just sang an even song. So some big differences, obviously several thousands of years have passed. One is accompanied by the organ. Some similarities, they're all singing in unison until they got to the word blessed, shall call me blessed, and then they popped into different parts to highlight that text. So again, that Sarah McDonald setting of the Mag in A flat. Every year, this text pops up in our own lectionary, not only in the Presbyterian Church, but in all that follow the common lectionaries. So that's the Anglicans, and the Episcopalians, and even the Roman Catholics on Advent 3. And that's the Pink Candle Sunday, because it's the Sunday we remember, in particular, Mary. So our own Rutter Magnificat that we're going to be offering next week. I can't believe it's next week. I feel like I need just one more week to get things where it needs to be, but no rest for the weary. Rutter writes, I'm going to read a little bit of his program notes because, when the composer is alive and actually taking the time to write, we might as well listen to what he has to say about it. He says, musical settings of this text abound, though surprisingly few of them since Bach gave the text an extended treatment. So we have lots for the use in services like evensong and vespers, but those are typically syllabic settings, meaning it takes about 6 minutes max to sing all the words, and you don't repeat any of the words. It's like a hymn. So this is an extended setting that we'll be offering at Westminster, And we'll be listening and watching some. You'll see some of the text repeated, and that's intentional. You'll see some of his approach. Let's see. He wasn't sure how to approach it until he found his starting point, which was associating the text of the Virgin Mary in countless places in Spain, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. So Rutter himself found inspiration in at least non-German and English music, but further south. These images of the Blessed Virgin of outdoor celebration were, I think, somewhere in my mind as I wrote, though I was not fully conscious of the fact till afterwards. So it's rather dense writing. What he's saying is, in other traditions, particularly in Southern Europe, Greece, Spain, and in Latin America, Mary is really elevated, regardless of the name on the church door. And often there's a statue of the Virgin, there's flowers, and on special days like Advent 3, the statue is taken out and hoisted up on 4 shoulders and paraded about the town. And so that's what he's talking about. There's a real sense of community celebration, and that's where he's going for within his setting of the Magnificat. For me, and for all singers, when we do these major works, we only get to do them a few times in our lifetime. So they're always associated to memories. And if you were in my class for the Duraflay, you know, it was associated with the death of my grandfather and my first on-stage performance of a sacred work. Well, this one, similar things, but a little more mundane. Jason and I had a little flood at our mountain house when I was doing my score study. So you'll notice I have a little bit of water damage in my conductor's score here. So anytime that I do the Rutter Magnificat in the future, I'll remember that the pipe cement I used was incorrect, and I flooded our kitchen because this was on the floor. I find Rutter's music to be very easy to listen to. In fact, a lot of my colleagues call it Hollywood or Broadway come to church. It's almost chocolate cake. It's very easy to listen to. And the reason for that is he uses things like rhythmic motifs. So you all know the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. Dun, 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 dun. So short, 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 long. Even the Freemasons pick that up as the secret knock to get into their temples. So those rhythmic motifs get stuck in our head. Just those 4 simple notes, even if they didn't have pitch, you would recognize the rhythm. Rutter does the same thing with the text Magnificat. So it's long, short, short, short. So it's the inverse of Beethoven's Fifth. And you'll hear that both at the beginning of the work and also at the very end when the text changes, you hear the percussion section play that rhythm as a final. Oh, here it is again, just so you remember it as you go home. He uses a lot of homophonic writing. That's like hymns, where there's 4 parts or sometimes 6 or 8, but they're all singing the same words at the same time. So it's easy to understand the text. And for the singers, it's very familiar in style. We all know how to sing a hymn, so this is just a hymn-like setting. He also uses interesting things like a stretto entrance, and now let's see if I can actually show this to you. Yes, terrific. And if I zoom in, oh, even better. So this is in the middle of one of the movements that the location really isn't important, but not only a stretto entrance is where voices enter at different times. So you can see it starts with the sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. But also the text painting is interesting here. You kind of have to ignore the italicized words. Rutter, also ever the practical composer, publishes this with both a set of Latin words and a set of English words. The English words are not a literal translation, they're a poetic translation. So this is talking about where God scatters the proud. So what happens is as though God in heaven is scattering the proud and it just descends. And for those at home, I should probably do it on my computer. So that's what he's doing with the music. So it's a very clear oral representation of the text, scattering the proud. Then he uses classical forms as well, like a fugue. And whoops, undo. So a fugue is an imitative section, imitative piece, usually for the organ, but it's been taken in other forms these days. But it has a particular formula. So the Pachelbel canon, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is not a fugue. A canon is something that starts at different times, but the notes are exactly the same. Row, row, row your boat is one if you don't know the Pachelbel, or as I like to say, the Taco Bell canon. Anyway, a fugue has very specific rules. So the subject of the fugue can be anything, but then what comes next, the counter subject, must start at the interval of a fifth. And then the episodes that come later are also stacked in fourths or fifths. So it's not an exact repeat of the text. You can see one of his fugue subjects here, letter C, fecit potentiam. And you'll notice it starts off with the basses, so in bass clef, and that pitch is a C sharp. Then further down on the page, I'm not going to scroll because I'll lose my ability to write on it. The tenors come in on a G. It's in the treble clef. So that's the interval of a fifth. If we count, C being 1, C, D, E, F, G. And you see that style continue on as he continues his fugue to work out sort of a musical riddle. You ask a question and then you have lots of working on it, and then you finally get to the answer at the end of it. And that the text there is, he has showed strength with his arm, and it starts off big and bold and brassy with the gentleman. The last thing that I'm going to show you before we start listening is actually the very first part of the piece. So you can see on this side of the page, it's going to zoom in a little bit. Actually, let me zoom out so you can see the whole thing. So this is my conductor's score. Up at the top, you see lines for flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and horns. So we basically have a woodwind quintet. Then in the middle, there's 2 lines for percussion because Rutter really likes his color. So we'll have not only the typical timpani, which we enjoy for festival Sundays, there's also limited snare drum, suspended cymbal, and glockenspiel scattered throughout. But scattered is the operative word, which is what I'm going to talk about now. You'll notice it starts off, and I know you can't see all the detail of this, but you can see the ink on the page. There's ink in the top part of the score. There's nothing down at the bottom. The chorus hasn't come in yet. Then on the last couple of measures, the bottom part of the score is the string section, which is quieter than the woodwind and brass section, right? So it's rolling along. Then on this page, you can see ink top and bottom, so everybody in the orchestra is playing. And then as soon as the choir comes in, which is here, the orchestra is absent. And this is just an example of Rutter being real skillful in his craft. He wants the choir to be heard. Many other composers before Rutter, Beethoven, Mozart, etc., doubled choir parts within the orchestra. Well, that's great if you have a symphonic hall and a 200-voice chorus. It's not so great if you have a room like ours, which is very dry, and 60 voices in the choir. So this is just a way to help the audience, or in our case, the congregation, understand the words being sung by the choir. Unlike the Duraflé that we did before, you'll notice I didn't say the word organ in this at all. Rutter's use of the organ is very sparing throughout the entire piece. In the Duraflé, here he was working extra hard on every note of every measure to play really hard stuff that was often doubled by the orchestra. Rutter decided, we're going to give the organist a break. They're going to be the glue that holds things together, and we're going to let all the hard work be done by the instrumentalists that are on the stage. So it's just a different compositional approach. We talked about the colors in the percussion section, and I have talked too much. So let's listen to some of Rutter's Magnificat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second because I think I can do it the other way so everyone at home can see a little bit better. So it'll take just a second to make this little changeover. So this piece I chose for Westminster for Advent lessons and carols because there's 7 movements. We've always done 7 lessons and 7 carols. I chose it this year because in Advent lessons and carols, we often encourage our children to have singing roles in the service. And because of the pandemic, that just wasn't possible this year. So this is primarily an adult choir thing with children functioning as some of the readers. And now I have to figure out how to share my camera. That's not it. Oh, maybe it's that. There we go. 3180. See if it works. And if you joined us late, you missed my apology. My laptop completely died. It won't even turn on now. And iPads are great for hosts of things, but hosting these meetings is not one of them because it takes quite a long time to go back and forth. It says it's thinking. I'll try it one last time and then I'll just give up. Oh, it says we're connected. We are. Perfect. Okay. So here we go. So now we're on to Rutter's Magnificat. This is the first. Oh. Okay. Back to the old way. Stop mirroring. It's okay. It will work. All right. Here we go. So far, the only words are Magnificat anima mea, over and over and over. My soul magnifies the Lord. So this is a new section. This is in God, my Savior. And he returns to the original theme again here. For he hath regarded the lowly of the earth. Next word, ecce, behold. Here it is. And Yesel, so just like Pharaoh setting Yesel, suddenly the fire expands here into sixth level. all generations shall call me blessed. And then one more time back to you. Here's a good one. Magnificat. So even if you've never spoken Latin in your life, if you don't have Magnificat screwed into your brain, you really need to check those hearing aid batteries. So that's an example of the great joy. You probably heard, even with our quiet speakers, some tambourines, some glockenspiel, a little bit of snare drum, but sparingly used and only used to highlight the text. And I also, as I was talking, this is a ternary form, which means there's three big parts. But there's also a rondo, which means the A section, the first section, comes back over and over. So you heard that Magnificat in three different spots throughout the beginning and the end. The next section is departing from our Latin history to a 15th century carol, and I'll just read some of the words to you. Of a rose, a lovely rose, of a rose is all my song. Hearken to me, both old and young, how this rose began to spring. A fairer rose to mine, my king, in all this world, nay, know I none. And then it goes on to describe 5 different branches, and those, of course, are the rose is a metaphor of Christ child. And it talks about the rose. The first branch was great honor, that blessed Mary should bear the flower. The second branch with great of might, the spring upon Christmas night. So all these lovely Middle English lyrics. The third branch did spring and spread, 3 kings, then the branch gan led, so about the epiphany of the wise men. The fourth branch it sprang to hell, the devil's power for to fell, that no soul therein should dwell. The branch so blessed fully sprang. Listen for that fourth branch music when we get to it. The texture completely changes because, of course, that's the promise of our salvation. So this is the second movement of Brothers.
Scrooge was the one person in town until a
Hard to get these days.
Completely different. And now we get the church. So this is the first branch was a great honor. The next one is the third branch, which is talking about the kings. Listen to the way he uses the music to paint their journey. Oh, sorry, we have the refrain first. This is the other rose, a lovely rose. And now we get the last one. Uses the oboe to create sort of a Middle Eastern Persian sound in the orchestra. And this is Springing to Hell. For the first time, the whole choir sings. So again, he's just a master at showing what's going on with the text by use of the orchestra and the colors within the orchestra. I'm going to keep moving because the Magnificat's about 37 minutes long, which is perfect for us to add the various bits of liturgy around it. So we'll come in right at an hour time mark. I'm always conscious that, I don't want those Methodists beating us to lunch. Anyway, I say that to the choir more often than I should. The next movement, Quia fecit mihi magna, which means he that is mighty has done great things. And I'm going to skip over this one for now because I want to make sure there's time for question. But in it, like I was saying, Rutter is a very practical composer for churches. He separates first and second sopranos out in this as a separate part. So it's like a 5-part fugue. And the reason for that is most choirs, like our choir, have twice as many sopranos as any other voice part within the choir. So if you divide them up, especially when our chorister girls, then you get a 5-voice choir instead of a 4-voice choir. So it's just a way of him showing off his knowledge of how to write for the masses. It just so happens that we have a baptism scheduled for this week. And at the end of this movement, our choristers girls sing Holy, 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 which we're going to listen to right now. So you can just imagine within the liturgy next week, we've done all this big and brassy stuff. We've heard about the strength of his arm. And then to set us up for baptism, our chorister girls, get out your hankies, will sing just play a little of the opening. So big, flashy, with a key that is mighty. So that rolls on for a while, but like I said, we're short on time, so I'm going to skip to the end. So completely different in the way in which he ends it, which sets us up beautifully, I think, for the baptism. Rutter didn't just rely on his experience with Southern European and Latin American life experiences regarding the Blessed Virgin. He also leaned back on Western Europe, particularly Mozart. He didn't write this about himself, but it's my commentary on it. The next piece is actually not Rutter.
Let's go help people
It's
customize and save with Liberty Mutual. Okay, who sat at my desk?
This Black Friday, do you want a TV?
No.
Or do you want?
Thanks. So this, we're just going to have to listen to, is Mozart's setting for Vespers, and this is the Magnificat, the same text. Later we get a movement called the Laudate on, which I'm sure you might not be recognizing. Anyway, choirs like ours sing this all the time. It's gorgeous because of the sound, but it's also gorgeous because it starts with the soprano solo, and then later the full choir echoes the soprano, which we're about to hear. And it's Mozart, so it lasts for a while. I'll fast forward just so you can hear the choir. One more measure to the choir line. And then there's the choir. So Mozart, I think, influenced Rutter in his next movement. So this is the Et Misericordia. And his mercy is on them that fear him. So just like Mozart's sparse orchestra, solo voice, also a soprano voice. Unlike Mozart, for the modern attention deficit audience, a much shorter solo than the choir. Also, it's very practical. And his mercy is on them that fear him throughout all. But even without the words in front of you, the certain sense of peace and calm is absolutely clear. Well, there's many more movements, but if I'm going to take any questions, I better move to those now. We'll get to hear this in its entirety next week, paired with lessons that I've chosen this year, actually, to go with the various the movements of the piece, and then, of course, the Randall children being baptized. So it's meant to be a really special service. Are there questions you might have?
What instruments did Rutter himself play?
He's primarily an organist. He was trained at the keyboard. And then, of course, he conducts his own, well, much like me, he conducts his own choirs, plays the organ, and composes. Nothing else?
What are his other really famous?
He has a famous setting of the Gloria, which is extended like the Magnificat. He has a fairly famous setting of the Te Deum, which is in English. What else have I done? He has, scads of Christmas carols for small orchestra. Many of you, you're nodding, you must have them on your playlist or on the CDs at home, right? Yeah, a lot of that stuff is tugged on the heartstring in just the right way. He also has some harder things. The choir was going to do one of his longer anthems that's based on a psalm on Homecoming Sunday this year. But with the masks and everything, I decided, we're going to save all that work for when we can actually do it and feel good about doing it and not have to sing behind these things.
Right.
So we'll do it later. Yes, Paul.
Where are the main centers for church music instruction in our times today?
Those have shifted quite a bit. The Westminster Choir College was probably the one that everyone would know about, and of course it's no longer. So that's a real loss for our community. There are a lot of small liberal arts schools that have historic connections to churches, like mine. Furman was founded by the Southern Baptist Convention in the 70s and has since pulled away, but the church music program is still very strong. Many of the seminaries like Princeton have really excellent church music programs. And also there's a couple of organ schools like Indiana University and Eastman, because, if you're training to be an organist, you're training to be a church musician, whether you like it or not. And, so those would be the places, really. There are some state schools with big programs as well. Well, thank you for joining me today. Thanks everybody for home. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah.